Good evening, everyone. Welcome again to We Are the Builders Australia, live number 21. And I have my fellow comrade and very good friend. Welcome, Helen. How are you today?
Oh, I'm good, thanks, Dave. I'm very good. How are you?
Good. Good. Busy, but good. Well,
Yeah, I think I've got to say, I think the war in Ukraine is no. I'm going to rephrase it. I think the war against Russia has kind of impacted everybody in different ways, and
yeah,
so for our listeners, if we're a little bit flat, I think we can say it's down to the conditions that are occurring internationally.
yeah. And the economic conditions are changing too pretty drastically. The rise of fuel. I was actually in the supermarket before I came home just to grab a couple of groceries and just looking at the prices of a lot of items now. Now, if oil reaches to $300 a barrel, that's just going to make the economies crash. Australia is not immune to this. We may not as compared to others be as it looks like we've been impacted, but it will catch up with us, and the cost of living is going to be going through skyrocketing through the roof, and it's going to be hard for a lot of people out there. It's going to be a big fight for. It's going to for a lot of workers out there. We're actually entering a lot of negotiations this year for renewing, enterprise agreements, and this is going to be the tough fight about pay rise because even if people do receive an example, a significant pay rise, maybe anywhere from for example, 3%, 3.5% per annum for 3 years. That's all going to be swallowed up left, right, and centre because of you look at the cost of everything going through the roof. So it's got. I was just thinking, well, by golly, if whoever forms government, be it a state or federal, if you cannot feed people, hungry people, and you've got empty stomachs out there, just look out. Beware. Well, yeah, go on. Sorry.
Wh- I was just going to say it's an interesting way to start our discussion tonight, but um, maybe we can continue this discussion after you've done the introductions
Yes. No.
before we
Well,
start in on our readings, even necessarily.
yes, we'll do that. And look, I'd like to welcome everyone and also welcome future viewers and listeners to the program as well. Uh, we are broadcasting from, or I'm from here, the land of the Jar Jar Rowan, and I'd like to acknowledge the first people, the past, present, and future, and also acknowledge that their struggle was originally one against invasion of their land and an anti-colonial struggle, which is now formed actually a rather broader struggle against imperialism and a stage of capitalism, and obviously now unity amongst all the poor sections of society, the working classes, and the First Nations as well is imperative into our struggle. Against imperialism, because obviously you can see the system is now in going into further crisis. And Comrade Pinker, you're absolutely spot on there. $2 for fuel at the pump, bloody hell, yes it is. I've actually seen it through here, regional Victoria. Actually up to $2.22 at one place. Yeah, no, so that it is not going to decrease anytime soon, or if it does decrease, it would be very slightly. Well, we are going to finish off the study of Mar's works on New Democracy. However, we will be jumping a couple of chapters because once we discussed it amongst ourselves, there was some stuff that is just not relevant for Australia. It was pertaining to China at the time, a lot of language. It was a particular issue. So we will be studying chapters 11, 14, and 15 tonight, and that will round up this session as well. I highly recommend his works. He certainly how he articulated his writing, very similar to some of the Soviet leaders over the time as well. But this is for his actual on the ground experience that he put this in, put pen to paper, and obviously through that apply scientific socialism to the conditions of his time. So what we'll do, we'll probably read. What do you say? We just read a page each, or the first chapter 11 he goes for a page and a half. So just if you want, kick it off, Helen.
All right. So, chapter 11, the culture of new democracy. In the foregoing, we have explained the historical characteristics of Chinese politics in the new period and the question of new democratic republic. We can now proceed to the question of culture. A given culture is the ideological reflection of the politics and economics of a given society. There is in China an imperialist culture, which is a reflection of imperialist rule or partial rule in the political and economic fields. This culture is fostered not only by cultural organizations run directly by imperialists in China, but by a number of Chinese who have lost all sense of shame. Into this category falls all cultural embodying a slave ideology. China also has a semi feudal culture which reflects her semi feudal politics and economy, and whose exponents include all those who advocate the worship of Confucius, the study of Confucian canon, the old and ethical code, and old ideas in opposition to the new culture and new ideas. Imperialist culture and semi feudal culture are devoted brothers and have formed a reactionary cultural alliance against China's new culture. This kind of reactionary culture serves the imperialist and the feudal class and must be swept away. Unless it is swept away, no new culture of any kind can be built up. There is no construction without destruction, no flowing without damming, and no motion without rest. The two are locked in a life and death struggle. As for the new culture, it is the ideological reflection of the new politics and the new economy which it sets out to serve. As we have already stated in section 3, Chinese society has gradually changed in character since the emergence of a capitalist economy in China. It is no longer an entirely feudal, but a semi feudal society, although the feudal economy still predominates. Compared with the feudal economy, this capitalist economy is a new one. The political forces of the bourgeoisie, the petty bourgeoisie, and the proletariat are the new political forces which have emerged and grown simultaneously with this new capitalist economy. And the new culture reflects these new economic and political forces in the field of ideology, and it serves them. Without the capitalist economy, without the bourgeoisie, the petty bourgeoisie, and the proletariat, and without the political forces of these classes, the new ideology or the new culture cannot have emerged. These new political, economic, and cultural forces are all revolutionary forces which are opposed to the old politics, the old economy, and the old culture. The old is composed of two parts, one being China's own semi feudal politics, economy, and culture, and the other the politics, economy, and culture of imperialism, with the latter heading the alliance. Both are bad and should be completely destroyed. The struggle between the new and the old in Chinese society is a struggle between the new forces of the people, which is the various revolutionary forces or classes, and the old forces of imperialism and the feudal classes. They're a combined alliance. It is a struggle between revolution and counter-revolution. This struggle has lasted 100 years, if dated from the Opium War, and nearly 30 years, if dated from the Revolution of 1911. But as already indicated, revolutions can also be classified into old and new, and what is new in one historical period becomes old in another. The century of China's bourgeois democratic revolution can be divided into two main stages, a first stage of 80 years and a second of 20. Each has its basic historical characteristics. China's bourgeois democratic revolution in the first 80 years belongs to the old category, while in the last 20 years, owing to the change in international and domestic political situation, it belongs to the new category. Old democracy is the characteristic of the first 80 years. New democracy is the characteristic of the last 20 years. This distinction holds good in culture as well in politics. So how does it manifest itself in the field of in the field of culture? We shall explain this next.
Did we want to have a little discussion on that, what we were talking before? Because what was an interesting point that was raised there, that was about imperialist culture. when he actually referred back to that. And he says there, when he says there in China is an imperialist culture, which is a reflection of imperialist rule or partial rule in the political and economic fields. And I was just thinking how this pertaining to Australia. Is there an imperialist culture here? Because we are actually ruled by imperialism. The economic basis is not a policy; it's the economic basis of imperialism, and Australia is caught within that predominantly, which is the US imperial bloc. And I think the culture you can see as well. You can see in it, we actually, no offense to people in the US or North America, but we've actually adopted some of their culture as well. Even too, when it was under the British thing, we adopted a lot of the British culture and try to impose that onto everybody else as well. So it's coming out of being. So even if we want to change society, we're still going to have to deal with some of the cultural trends that are coming out of even the modern cultural trends we're seeing now. Political trends, a whole lot. Its basis is within the economic framework of imperialism.
Yeah, and China was a little bit different, and they came from that peasant culture and that kind of feudal culture, and then there was the emergence of the capitalist state or capitalist class arising out of the midst of feudalism and out of the midst of the peasantry, and of course what was happening internationally as well. So you had these two political forces that were kind of opposed to each other, but by the same time they were united, in fact, because they really had one agenda, and that was to make sure that the working class didn't take political power. Emerging out of that conflict between themselves, what they feared the most was that the possibility that the working class and the new and any alliances that formed with the peasantry would maybe create a revolutionary change in society. And what's interesting is that Mao here is saying is that the old economy was made up of 80% of the peasantry or the feudal economy, and 20% of it was made up of the new culture of imperialism. But what he particularly says here is that they were also really, both of them were bad, and the only the real conflict that was going on was that the struggle of that third class, or that third struggle that was going on with what could possibly emerge was the new working class, and where those allegiances would lie, and they weren't going to ally themselves necessarily with feudalism, the old peasantry system, and they weren't necessarily going to see that capitalism was going to be good for them. So there was the kind of conflict that both of those systems were going to be bad for the working class, but that third way forward of essentially socialism was not yet quite on the cards either.
Mm. Mm.
And I think there was another. Sorry, and I'll just make kind of go back to where he was saying that culture is something that's really imposed on us from the ruling class. It's not the working class culture of the people. It's the culture of the working class. And it's the culture of the imperialist class or the ruling class that gets imposed on us. And we need to see that those two things, whoever the ruler is will impose a culture on us. Whoever the ruler is will impose an economy on us. Whoever the ruler is will also impose a political system on us. Those are all interlinked. We can't say that any of those are independent. So whoever the ruling class is, that's the dominant political, economic, and cultural forces in society. And what socialism says is, well, workers need to become the dominant class. They need to take control of politics. They need to take control of the economy. And there needs to be the dominance of working class politics.
Yeah. And you can see the culture it's posed on us. It's all a corporate advertising from the moment we wake up to the time we go to bed. We're consistently bombarded, and it's not just the capitalist ideology, but it's propaganda, it's advertisements. It whittles its way into everything. From example, sports are a very classic example. I mean, you go to a major game, be it football or cricket or whatever else, the amount of corporate sponsorship, we're consistently bombarded. Our stadiums become named after corporate sponsors. Mars Stadium in Ballarat, for example, Mars Wrigley. I mean, why can't they just call that Ballarat Oval or something like that? Or Docklands Stadium. I think, what's the new name for Optus Stadium or something? It should be just called Docklands. And then, fortunately, MCG still kept its name. But I've heard all sorts of names. They said these were all built for workers, built by workers and for the whole population to enjoy. But as soon as a corporate sponsor come around, be it a major bank or whatever other corporation comes along, they put their name on it, and the whole language starts changing. We start using this corporate culture language as well. And if anyone say, "Oh, I'm going to Optus Stadium," I'm just going to look at them and go, "What? It's not a name. It's the name of a multinational communications company. It's nothing to do with that." But you could see it, and you can see with the sport, the advertisements, the sponsorships, the whole lot. Just on the crowd, just without going off track here, but I find it a bit rich. For many years, we'll actually campaign to have tobacco sponsorship out of sports, like the old Winfield Cup and Winfield this and Peter Jackson that. And now we all of a sudden we've got alcohol sponsorship, and also junk food, Hungry Jacks and McDonald's. And I mean, we're trying to promote, sport being healthy and promote good health and that. Why the hell do we have it's industries that their products are not so healthy? I'm sure I enjoy a beer, but it's at the end of the day, or a good wine. But the fact is, the end of the day, it's putting that on sports. I find that rather contradictory, to say the least. But it's everything we do. We're caught up into it the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed at night. So there.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I was just going to say, actually, that's kind of the difference between how we were organised 40 or 50 years ago compared to how we are now. Is that nowadays there's complete saturation. No matter where our kids turn, no matter where we turn, there's complete saturation of the media. So it doesn't matter if you go on, and none of the content is different. That's the real problem with mainstream content. They don't really care that Facebook allows people to express different ideas, because most of the ideas on Facebook, for instance, are mainstream. And in fact, we're seeing now that in actual fact, if you oppose the US position or the Australian position on Russia, for instance, and the position of placing Ukraine as the innocent victim of some kind of invasion by this huge major economic force that there's no historical connection or no historical background to it. Facebook doesn't care. This is the kind of information they're promoting. So nowadays we have so much media saturating us. It doesn't, and people might call it independent, and under this kind of democracy that we have, you can express your ideas and so on. But no, you actually can't, because all of the ideas that come through all of the streams, all of the mechanisms of capitalism are all pushing one idea. They're not pushing independence. In fact, they're shutting down independent media.
That's right. I mean, a classic case to the point, RT in the US, and we can still access it in some ways, and I can still access it. But RT, people say it's state controlled. It's not state controlled at all. It's actually a private company. But they have allowed the ability for many journalists and commentators to express freely, and it's been some really good quality journalism out of it there. For example, Redacted with I forget what's his name now. Well, the name just went right out of my head just there, but it's a really good show.
Lee Charles.
Leach, that's the one, and he's a
Yeah.
comedian as well. Fantastic, and he's been ability to. He just does his write his own material and ability to do that. But he was shut down because RT had to shut down, basically, and many others as well. And also their documentaries and the quality of their documentaries, their news is a lot different from what we're generally used to. But far as I care, a lot of the news mainstream media here is now rubbish. It's just junk. It's like going to a $2 shop and just buying junk or something all the time, and plastic piece of garbage all the time. So that's what it basically is. It's not really the quality journalism that's being thrown out on our behalf. I mean, so yeah, it comes to show, and it's a two prong. Actually, it's a two-prong approach to this. The banning of RT here, or Europe and UK and America, etc., and Canada. It's a two-prong approach. One, because it's an opposing voice, and they don't want everyone. They can suppress any type of information coming through, and have the controlled information, so they can control it. This is we want what the population to think. It's the Rule 1984 mindset, newspeak they called it. It's yes, we have freedom. In fact, we've got enslavement. And yeah, newspeak. And anyway, but on the other side of it too, this allows the Western multinationals such as the Murdoch Empire, CNN, Kerry Stokes here, for example, everyone else, to more further monopolise their hold. They're just pushing all the players out. So when someone said, "Oh, well, independent journalists," well, there may be a little room for a little bit, but even that's starting to squeeze out. No, you're not coming in anymore. So it works two ways. For that allows in the major media. Well, let's call them what they are. They're the oligarchs, not these Russian oligarchs. Right? If we want to know, Rupert Murdoch, the Murdoch family, they're the oligarchs and the Stokes of the world and all the Western media. What they're basically doing, is just completely monopolise the market. No, you can't come in. If you want to work for us, well, that's the line you're taking. So it works well for the War Department. Let's call it what it is. It's not the Department of Defence, Department of War, and carnage. And so that suits it fine. And I mean, for the Pentagon and Washington, that suits the narrative, and the Eastern establishment, that suits the narrative. For the media empires, that suits the narrative. Right, we've pushed you all out now. But what's the upside of it? I watched George Galloway's mother of all talk shows. His audience has grown significantly over the last 2 weeks, massively, and you can still access it for other means as well, like Telegram, etc. And it's amazing. A lot of people are yearning for more different information because they know somehow there's something amiss. They might say something about Ukraine, but hang on, something's amiss here. Something's not right, and we're looking for So they are finding other ways of. People are finding other ways to get alternative sources as well. It's always a case. You try and suppress something, they'll find a way of getting it. So, yeah.
No, and it's so true. And without actually, maybe expressing our personal opinions or our, the parties that we might belong to or anything, and not that you and I belong to parties or anything, but
Mm.
the fact is that we should be allowed to have an independent opinion. And
Yeah,
we should be
without being.
allowed to source that independent opinion from facts that either the media provide to us or that, we source from reputable institutions and so on. We should have the freedom to find out for ourselves what's going on around the world.
Mm.
And at the
Exactly.
moment, we don't have that. We are being fed just a carnage of lies, just
That's
an
right.
absolute carnage of lies. And, for anybody that has any understanding of what's going on in the world, you only need to look at the carnage of lies they told us about Iraq, the carnage of lies they told us about Libya, the carnage of
Mm.
lies they've told us about just about anything and
Syria,
anywhere that
another
they've
one.
invaded.
Mm.
And all you
Mm.
need to say was, well, is there any truth in what they're saying about Russia? But go back to what Mao has said here, and that he has said that it's an imperialist culture, which is a reflection of imperialist rule. And
Yeah.
so anything that we are hearing about from imperialism is imperialist ideology, it's imperialist ideas, and it's
Mm.
about their rule. It's as
Yeah,
simple as that. It's not a
yeah,
complicated issue. We
yeah,
have to get beyond thinking that somehow we don't understand because we're just ordinary workers, that
yeah,
somehow these things spring out of just nowhere. They
yeah,
don't. These are issues that have historical um, understandings, they have historical conflicts behind them, but most importantly, we as the working class just need to understand that we are being fed a pack of lies. And when we start to understand that, then we start to say, okay, well, how are we going to do something differently?
that's
And
right.
this Russian situation, this Ukrainian situation is no different. It's just another pack of lies that the imperialists are feeding us, and that it's their culture to impose their rule over us.
Yeah. And see, this is another thing too. Culture is a reflection of the economic base, not the other way around. And imperialism is not for example, is not a government policy. It is a system. It is capitalism at its highest stage. It's monopoly stage, where it monopolises all countries, whole countries, a whole lot, to suck as much wealth out there as possible and concentrate it into fewer and fewer hands. This is what we're seeing now in front of our very eyes. So that's what it is. And culture is part of it. It's a reflection. It's secondary, not primary. And I think it's trying not to get too far technical about it, but we got to understand what focus on what's primary and what's secondary. And culture is a reflection of that. Culture just didn't spring out of nowhere. It happens to be part of the evolving with the current changing of the economic system we live under, the economic basis. And I think that's something that will always be vital to mind, because what was explaining in there, he's explaining this is where that's at, and where culture was, and where it's in a constant state of change, and it will change with those material conditions change as well, but so as people's ideas. What we're talking about here, and this is what I mentioned at the start of the show, about people with empty stomachs. The fact is, we're bombarded with all this stuff. We have to talk a particular way, or you get cancelled, which is completely, this is all part of that economic basis stuff. And or you get censored, cancelled, shut down, shouted at, whatever. And the fact is, I'm going to warn everyone, especially the ruling class, you're bringing all this cancel culture in and everything else. This is going to be a backlash against it, because wait till everyone has got empty stomachs. That's where revolutions. That's pretty much where it started, and it's going to be the wrath of the working class is going to be huge against it. We're not going to tolerate that. So it's just something that always keep me back in mind. I'll probably kicked off Facebook now for saying this, and banned for 30 days as usual, like it's happened to many other comrades I've known over there too. So and denunciated and called all sorts of names, but I don't care. It's just the truth is that's just what's going on at the moment, and we are being lied to about this as well. And as far as I care, the media stance, the government stance, and anyone's been around this stance going along with it is completely wrong about what's going on in the Ukraine. Simple as that. They know, and they know that too. And what actually, which really gets under my skin. There's a lot of people that do know what's going on, but they're choosing to side with the reactionary forces. And it gets balls my blood. Gosh, I wish I had a big pair of bat wings and be terrorising people and taking them to hell for doing so. All right, well, look, going jokes forward, moving forward, we're on now chapter 14, some wrong ideas about the nature of culture. Did you want me to kick it off? I can, how many, oh, that's not that long. I can read the whole thing if you like, and we can comment on
Okay.
that.
Yep.
Excuse me. Okay, chapter 14, some wrong ideas about the nature of culture. Everything new comes from the forge of hard and bitter struggle. This is also true of the new culture, which also followed a zigzag course in the past 20 years, during which both the good and the bad were tested and proved in struggle. The bourgeois diehards are as hopelessly wrong on the question of culture as on that of political power. They neither understand the historical characteristics of this new period in China, nor recognise the new democratic culture of the masses. Their starting point is bourgeois despotism, which in culture becomes the cultural despotism of the bourgeoisie. It seems that a section, in brackets, and I refer only to a section, of educated people from the so called European American school, who in fact supported the Kuomintang government's communist suppression campaign on the cultural front in the past, are now supporting its policy of restricting and corroding the Communist Party. They do not want the workers and the peasants to hold up their heads politically and culturally. Sounds familiar. This bourgeois die-hard road of cultural despotism leads nowhere. As in the case of political despotism, the domestic and international preconditions are lacking. Therefore, this cultural despotism too had better be folded up. So far as the orientation of our national culture is concerned, communist ideology plays the guiding role, and we should work hard both to disseminate socialism and communism throughout the working class and to educate the peasantry and other sections of the people in socialism properly and step by step. However, our national culture as a whole is not yet socialist, and especially here. And because of the leadership of the proletariat, the politics, the economy, and the culture of the new democracy all contain an element of socialism, and by no means a mere casual element, but one with a decisive role. However, taken as a whole, the political, economic, and cultural situation so far is the new democratic and not socialist. For the Chinese Revolution in its present stage is not yet a socialist revolution for the overthrow of capitalism, but a bourgeois democratic revolution, its central tasks being mainly that of combating foreign imperialism and domestic feudalism. In the sphere of national culture, it is wrong to assume that the existing national culture is or should be socialist in its entirety. That would amount to confusing the dissemination of communist ideology and the carrying out of an immediate program of action, and to confusing the application of the communist standpoint and method in investigating problems, undertaking research, handling work, and training cadres, and the general policy of national education and national culture in the democratic stage of the Chinese Revolution. A national culture with a socialist content will necessarily be the reflection of a socialist politics and the socialist economy. There are socialist elements in our politics and our economy, and hence these socialist elements are reflecting in our national culture. But taking our society as a whole, we do not have a socialist politics and a socialist economy yet, so that there cannot be a wholly socialist national culture. Since the present Chinese Revolution is part of the world proletarian socialist revolution, the new culture of China today is part of the world proletarian socialist new culture and its great ally. While this part contains vital elements of socialist culture, the national culture as a whole joins the stream of the world proletarian socialist new culture, not entirely as a socialist culture. There's a lot of reading in this, I do apologise. But I decided to take up the task, but as the anti imperialist and anti feudal new democratic culture of the broad masses. And since the Chinese Revolution today cannot do without proletarian leadership, China's new culture cannot do without the leadership of proletarian culture and ideology, of communist ideology. At the present stage, however, this kind of leadership means leading the masses of the people in an anti-imperialist and anti-feudal political and cultural revolution, and therefore, taken as a whole, the content of China's new national culture is still not socialist but new democratic. Beyond all doubt, now is the time to spread communist ideas more widely and put more energy into the study of Marxism and Leninism, or otherwise we shall not only be unable to lead the Chinese Revolution forward to the future stage of socialism, but shall also be unable to guide the present democratic revolution to victory. However, we must keep the spreading of communist ideas and propaganda about the communist socialist system distinct from the practical application of the new democratic program of action. We must also keep the communist theory and method of investigating problems, undertaking research, handling work, and training cadres distinct from the new democratic line for national culture as a whole. It is undoubtedly inappropriate to mix the two up. It can thus be seen that the content of China's new national culture at the present stage is neither the cultural despotism of the bourgeoisie nor the socialism of the proletariat, but the anti-imperialist and anti-feudal new democracy of the masses under the leadership of proletarian socialist culture and ideology. Woo! That took a bit to read. So I hope everyone got that. Hmm,
Yeah, there's a lot of information in there.
hmm.
There's a lot for people to absorb. But I
Yeah.
guess if you had to make a comment about that entire paragraph, what they're still saying, what Mao is still saying is that we there are classes in society, and the classes in society are being reflected ideologically, politically, economically, culturally by whoever dominates. And he says here that a national culture with a socialist content will be necessarily the reflection of a socialist politics and a socialist economy. And that, I think, is the key to understanding this concept that every culture is reflected or has a reflection in who is in control, whoever is in power. So, and a lot of the time you'll hear, especially mainstream media or academia, saying art is a reflection of society. But that's not true. Art doesn't reflect society. What happens is that society is reflected in art. So if you live in a decadent society, it will be reflected in the art of that society. And we get that mixed up because we think that art is just born out of something benevolent about our society. So when you hear people talking about pornography as being art, what they're saying is that it's all innocent. It's pornography. But it's art. It's tasteful. There's something nice about it because it's not a reflection of the nastiness of the goddamn society that you're living in. When there's pornography that portrays children in that field, they're saying, well, no, that's just whatever they say. I don't even have the words for it, but I know that. But when they say art is a reflection of society, that is not true. It is society that is reflected in art. And so if we turn that around and say our culture is dominated by what's going on economically, socially, politically, that is what gets reflected in art, not the reverse. And so that's kind of what Mao's saying here, that if you have a socialist content to your art and to your culture, that's going to and therefore to have a socialist art and a socialist culture, you therefore must have you must have a socialist economy and you must have socialist politics. The two go hand in hand, and they will be totally different from capitalist art and capitalist that reflect capitalist politics and capitalist economy.
That's right. And the thing is, too, under a capitalist system or imperialist system, we've also heard the term art for art's sake. And we see these so-called artistic pieces around, like Forest Chase in Perth, that green blob sitting there. I mean, to me, that's not art. That's just a horrible looking thing that needs to be taken down and put for a recycling centre. And same like you go along the freeway going into all the city link in Melbourne, there's a great big yellow thing sticking out with a square box on it. I think it's supposed to be some sort of phallus symbol. That's not art. I mean, what's it mean? It's just nothing. We're supposed to go, oh my God, what a work of art, and be all cultural about it. It's nothing in it. It looks completely hideous. I mean, it's got. Yeah, you're right. It's got to be reflected, and I think for working class culture, our art generally is. I tend to see it like you can look at schools or some community centres. They put a mural on there as well. It's reflecting the culture of there, and I've noticed with people painting some of the wheat silos, the old wheat silos, and reflecting of the working people around there. To me, that's part of the culture. general working class people around the place. That's just one example. There's one of many out there. Not growing because some sort of green blob in the middle of the city and saying that's a work of art, and then using our taxpayers' money to fund it, and anyone can do that. It's just like, yeah. Oh, what's this one? I want one orange bean. Hang on, what's Clyde said? Yeah, one giant orange bean around a bunch of yellow beans. Yeah, that's right. And yeah, and that's all basically what it is. There's nothing good about it at all. And yeah, so we can see that. And it's interesting you mentioned all that, from pornography to other sort of decadent type artwork. It just and I like that came out really pretty much out of the '60s counterculture, and that's behind that. There's been a whole history behind that. It was actually the CIA and that, and have been involved in all that. Fancy just putting doing this and think it's artwork. And I think no, it looks like crap. It doesn't reflect an actual genuine class culture at all. So
Well,
I'll
and,
leave it at
and
that.
interesting
Yeah.
enough, and I just make this point too, is that if you look, and again going back to the situation with Russia and Ukraine, is that how much now are they just absolutely denigrating Soviet art and Soviet buildings and
Yeah.
Soviet anything that came from an era that has been dismantled. So why the need for the constant reference back to something that's been dismantled, that existed, 60, 70 years ago, but they keep reverting back to it as though saying, well, this is the only thing that the Soviets could think of as being a way to develop buildings or a way to develop
Yeah.
art, was that it was all realism and concrete realism, and so everything was based, their art, the Soviet art was based on concrete realism. That is, that it reflected what was actually happening at the time. And so
Mm.
it was all about geometrical lines, and their buildings were about geometrical lines. But that was what was occurring at the time. And that was reflected, society once again was reflected in art, not the
Mm.
reverse. Art didn't reflect society, it was a reflection of what was going on in the Soviet Union at the time. But
Mm.
now, what you all you can hear about anything Soviet is how that art and that culture is such a demoralizing, such a
Mm.
um, just so unethical to the way that we should be, and they
Yeah.
are just
Exactly.
going ballistic. If you had to describe any way that a Western media was behaving towards Soviet art and culture, was they are just going ballistic about it. They cannot
Yeah.
find enough words to denigrate it and to put it into the worst kind of category. And of course, that's
Mm.
why they're constantly trying to find links between Nazism and socialism. That we want to find those links, because the worst form of society is Nazism, and yet
Mm.
the West is
Fascism. Yeah.
championing fascism, and yet the worst of the West is championing all of these people in the Ukraine that are fascist. And so,
Yeah.
but they keep linking it up with the Soviet Union, which had nothing to do with fascism. They fought it, but they want to say, "Oh, fascism and the
Mm.
Soviet Union are on
Yeah.
equal par." Look at their art. Their art is a reflection of that. The art is a reflection of what was occurring at the time. It was concrete realism about where workers were at the time. And
Yeah.
anybody looking at Soviet art at the time, it is to be applauded. It's about workers. It's like
That's
looking
right.
at our constitution. What does our constitution say? It doesn't even mention people in our constitution. It's about processes. How can you get elected? Who's to be standing? Who's allowed to stand in our elections? And the rest of it. Women initially were not allowed to stand in elections, and they weren't even allowed to vote. Working class men that had no property weren't allowed to vote. So
Yeah.
these things, okay, that were reflected initially in our constitution, it's changed over time. But the fact is that, you know, uh, and I have lost my train of thought here,
That's
but the
right.
point
Mm.
was being that art and culture and society are reflected in each other, but
Yeah.
not one necessarily before the other. And our constitution never talks about people. It talks about processes. You go to any other constitution in the world, in the Soviet world, in the socialist world, China, Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, Iraq. Oh no, no, probably not Iraq because they didn't
Iran.
change their constitution. Iran under their revolution. I bet Libya. Jesus,
Mm.
the list goes on, and I bet the first thing they did was change their constitution to reflect the fact that they changed the base of who was in control of the country,
Yeah.
and that is that they were reflecting the fact that the workers were in control.
Exactly, exactly. And I think also too, just on that, you mentioned fascism, and I think we could clear it up what fascism actually is. Fascism is when imperialism is in crisis, and which is what we're seeing now. All right, in the world today, and fascism's primary role is to smash working class power and communism. That's what its primary purpose was, to beat that and to expand and maintain imperialist rule. That's what it does. That's its primary role. Being anti-Semitic and all that, yes, that's a part of it, but that's usually the secondary sort of choice. I mean, with that legendary poem that Priest wrote, but well, actually, it correctly started out. They came for the communists first, but I didn't do anything because I wasn't a communist. They came for the socialists next, but I didn't do anything because I wasn't a socialist. And then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't do anything because I wasn't a trade unionist. And then said they came for the Jews, and I didn't do anything because I wasn't a Jew, and so on and so on and so on. And deliberately, and that's a form of art too, to explain the struggle and explaining struggle against imperialism and especially fascism. They deliberately took those lines out, or the one about referring to the communists first, because knowing full well it's the communists that actually were the spearhead of the struggle against it in the first place, which is there to actually we're either trying to demonise the communists in one way or the other. But that's what its primary purpose, and this is what we're seeing with Ukraine. Ukraine, for example, it's got a fascist junta there. Sure, the president might be Jewish, but it doesn't matter. The fact is, you've got neo-Nazis running the place. Russia had to move into the Donbass because they were going to put a massacre in that whole region. So Russians had to step in then and there, stopped it. Now I didn't interact. But Ukraine, for the last 8 years, has been an economic basket case. It was full of organised crime, human trafficking and slavery, pedophilia, drug dealing and drug taking, legal arms exchange, the whole lot. What a real good place, and full of neo Nazis killing people all the time because either they spoke Russian or they're banning the Communist Party, crushing trade unions, especially after that what happened in Odessa back in 2014. I haven't forgotten about that, and I'm actually disappointed some trade unions don't realise that what happened back then. 40 trade unionists were murdered, brutally murdered, either incinerated alive or shot or bashed to death. And when I saw that, and is that something to be proud of? No. Yeah, and so yeah, and obviously the people of the Donbass, suffering for all these years as well, and it's been done deliberately. It was propped up by U.S. NATO imperialism as well. So Russia had to act. But going with the art form side of it, and I wanted to clarify something as well. Yes, they've been ripping down all Soviet monuments and also World War II monuments to defeat fascism, and then praising the fascist leaders like Bandera and the rest of them as well. Which I'm actually say even too. Israel made comment on it, but it didn't done much. It's surprising to hear they want to go about Nazism and being anti-Semitic and all this. And tell them, well, there you go. There's your example. No, not doing much about that at all, are they? Anyway, threw that one in
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
Mm.
no. It's a complicated. I don't like to suggest that things are complicated because all really we should suggest is that there's historical that there's a historical reasoning behind what's gone on,
Yeah,
and everybody needs to educate themselves about what's going on historically. It and that simplifies things. that simplifies things for people when you understand things historically. But
Mm.
by the same token, I don't want to say things are complex, because they're not really that complex. They're
No.
not that complex. It's
Mm.
just like, as you said, Dave, they'll come for the trade unions. First of all, they'll come for the communists. Secondly, they're going to come for the socialists. Thirdly, they're going to come for the trade unions. And when it
Mm.
comes down to it, they're the only forces in society that's going to be able to change anything. And that's why
Mm.
they come for us first, because they want to take us out and make sure that then all that they're attacking is a scapegoat.
Yep.
Because they're not going to tell you they came for the communists first. They're not going to tell you that they came for the unions first. People don't know how many communists in Bali were killed when the Indonesians went in. They don't know that nobody knows how many communists and how many trade unionists have been killed around the world, because they don't tell us that. But they'll
No.
tell us how many Jews have been killed. They'll tell us how many Ukrainians have been killed. And I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that I like the idea of bloodshed of any sort. That's not the
No.
point. The point is they're misdirecting and not telling us the truth because of the nature, as Mao said, of the culturalism that and the way that they use culture to deceive us, based on the fact that if you're the dominant ideology, then you're going to express the dominant. If you're dominant economically and dominant politically, then you're going to express that in
Mm.
your culture, and that's
That's
what's
right.
going on, and that's
That's
what's
right.
going on today. It's got
Yeah.
nothing to do with human rights. It's got nothing to do with anything um, other than the domination, or trying to dominate the world to to subjugate everybody else into the same culture.
Yep. Exactly. So just going to check any comments. Nope. All right. All right. Well, look, we'll continue now on to chapter 15. And that should, and then we can have a little discussion in the end. So that's just over 2 pages long. So, by the looks of it. Did you want to kick it off again?
Alrighty. So
I'll go on.
what
Sorry.
we've got is a national, scientific, and mass culture.
Yep.
New democratic culture is national. It opposes imperialist oppression and upholds the dignity and independence of the Chinese nation. I was just about to say the Australian nation. And I'm going to read that again, because it opposes imperialist oppression and upholds the dignity and independence of the Chinese nation or Australian nation. It belongs to our own nation and bears our own national characteristics. It links up with the socialist and new democratic cultures of other nations, and they are related in such a way that they can absorb something from each other and help each other to develop, together forming a new world culture. But as a revolutionary national culture, it can never link up without any reactionary imperialist culture or of whatever nation. To nourish her own culture, China needs to assimilate a good deal of foreign progressive culture, not enough of which has been done in the past. We should assimilate whatever is useful to us today, not only from the present day socialist and new democratic cultures, but also from the earlier culture of other nations. For example, from the culture of various capitalist countries of the Age of Enlightenment. However, we should not gulp any of this foreign material down uncritically, but we must treat it as we do our food, first chewing it, then submitting it to the working of the stomach and intestines with their juices and secretions, and separating it into nutrients to be absorbed and waste matter to be discarded before it can nourish us. To advocate wholesale westernization is wrong. China has suffered a great deal from the mechanical absorption of foreign material. Similarly, in applying Marxism to China, Chinese communists must fully and properly integrate the universal truth of Marxism with the concrete practice of the Chinese Revolution. Or, in other words, the universal truth of Marxism must be combined with specific national characteristics and acquire a definite national form if it is to be useful, and in no circumstances can it be applied subjectively as a mere formula. Marxists who make up a fetish of formulas are simply playing the fool with Marxism and the Chinese Revolution, and there is no room for them in the ranks of the Chinese Revolution. Chinese culture has its own form, its own national form, national in form and new democratic in content. Such is the new culture today. New democratic culture is scientific. Opposed as it is to all feudal and superstitious ideas, it stands for seeking truth from facts, for objective truth, and for the unity of theory and practice. On this point, the possibility exists of a united front against imperialism, feudalism, and superstition between the scientific thought of the Chinese proletariat and those of Chinese bourgeois materialists and natural scientists who are progressive, but in no case there is no possibility of a united front with any reactionary idealism. In the field of political action, communists may form an anti-imperialist and anti-feudal united front with some idealists and even religious people, but we can never approve of their idealism or religious doctrines. A splendid old culture was created during the long period of Chinese feudal society. To study the development of this culture, to reject its feudal dross and assimilate its democratic essence is a necessary condition for developing our own national culture and increasing our national self-confidence. But we should never swallow anything and everything uncritically. It's imperative to separate the fine old culture of the people, which had a more or less democratic and revolutionary character, from all the decadence of the ruling class. China's present new politics and new economy have developed out of her old politics and old economy, and her present new culture, too, has developed out of her old culture. Therefore, we must respect our own history and not lop it off. However, respect for history means giving it its proper place as a science, respecting its dialectical development and not eulogizing it, the past, at the expense of the present, or praising every drop of feudal poison. As far as the masses and young students are concerned, the essential thing is to guide them to look forward and not backward. New democratic culture belongs to the broad masses and therefore democratic. It should serve the toiling masses of workers and peasants who make up more than 90% of the nation's population and should gradually become their very own. There is the difference of degree as well as the close link between the knowledge imparted to the revolutionary cadres and the knowledge imparted to the revolutionary masses, between the raising of cultural standards and popularization. Revolutionary culture is a powerful revolutionary Revolutionary culture is a powerful revolutionary weapon for the broad masses of the people. It prepares the ground ideologically before the revolution comes, and it is important and indeed essential fighting front in the general revolutionary front during the revolution. People engaged in revolutionary cultural work are commanders at various levels on this cultural front. Without revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement. One can thus see how important the cultural movement is for the practical revolutionary movement. Both the cultural and practical movements must be of the masses. Therefore, all progressive cultural workers in the anti-Japanese war must have their own cultural battalions. That is, the broad masses. A revolutionary cultural worker who is not close to the people is a commander without an army, whose firepower cannot bring the enemy down. To attain this objective, written Chinese must be reformed. Given the requisite conditions and our spoken language brought closer to that of the people, for the people, it must be stressed, are the inexhaustible source of our revolutionary culture. A national scientific and mass culture such as the anti-imperialist and anti-feudal culture of the people, the culture of new democracy, and the new culture of the Chinese nation. Combine the politics, the economy, and the culture of new democracy, and you have the new democratic republic, the Republic of China, both in name and in reality, the new China we want to create. Behold, new China is within sight. Let us hail her. Her masts have already risen above the horizon. Let us all cheer and welcome. Raise both your hands. New China is ours. It is such, such an amazing document to read. To think
Yeah.
that, on the one hand, we live in a society that champions only one class of people, and
Yep.
we're talking the ruling class, and we're talking the middle class, and when you look at American culture and American TV, the every single program, every single everything you read, everything you see is about the ruling class or the middle class. You don't really get a sense of what the working class in America is, or about what being a working class person in America is really all about. You don't see them. You see snippets maybe of people hungry in the streets of New York and rats running around in the streets, but they never make a movie that is about those people and about that condition. But then they'll just show you those snippets so that you get an idea that, yeah, things aren't quite equal. We're not excluding them from our agenda, or our narrative or our stories, but we're not going to tell you their story because they're not
No.
important. But so every movie, every sitcom is about the middle class. Every house they live in is 4 or 5 bedrooms with elaborate lounge rooms and separate rooms for kitchens, and they don't show you 5, 10 people living in tiny flats or units, because that's not their reality. That's not the reality that they want to show us.
That's
So
right.
when you and they don't champion the working class, and when you read Mao like this, you understand that what they're saying is that there is there's a difference in our cultures. There's a difference in working class culture compared to the imperialist culture, and he's applauding it, and he's saying that we have to develop this. We have to develop our culture. We have to see it as being something that serves the majority of people, not something that serves the ruling class.
Scary about that is just my. I'll just turn this or close that. Someone just tried messaging. Sorry about that. You get a ding.
Yeah, no, I think it was my phone.
All right. Okay. So you go overall, it's we're reading through this. So I think it's been certainly a big eye opener. I love his work as well. Explaining, whoever's the predominant class in all the ruling classes in our societies, their culture was the one's going to predominate, and it's a reflection of that as well. And that was vitally important, because when people go and question, why is this happening? Why is it that way? Why is that way? Because this is capitalism. This is where the ruling class, that's their ideology that's coming through, and obviously all culture, all science, everything is garnered for them. That's what it all comes down to. It's like we were talking about automation. I think you and I have talked about, but I've talked about many other people. Automation, technology is good, but as long as it benefits the working class, but it's not. It's there created to make profit. Well, that's the other thing. I think we've got to also talk about culture and art and etc. It's there specifically to maintain and uphold profit and expand profit as well. Because under capitalism, everything's commodified to make it in. So be it with art form or any cultural, whatever activity you like to do. The fact is, at the end of the day, under capitalism, it's there to specifically designed to make profit, and that's what it's there for. Yeah, it's quite how it just enriched. It's into in every aspect of our lives where the profit motive is. We live under a system where profits are in command. So one of those things are the arts and culture as well. Art galleries and all that, and how they price them a lot. And yeah, but basically designed for investments and to make money out of, instead of something like actually to enjoy and be proud of, and there's something, well, this is great. No, we've got to make lots of millions of dollars out of this because someone in there, like a big bank or some multi-billionaire out there, is making a lot of money out of it. So this is to see the contrast with that. And you mentioned Soviet art before. It wasn't designed around a system of profit. It was designed around a system of socialism and a working class power. Pardon me.
Yeah, and also, we talk about culture, and we limit it to the idea that it's something in its physical form. So we talk about, we think of culture as being something like music, or we think about it being something like art and museums and um, concerts and fun and activity and all of these things, but that's not really the kind of culture that Mao's talking about either. It's an integral
Mm,
part of it, but really what he's saying is that there's something different between there's something different about the culture of the working class and the culture of the bourgeoisie, and or the ruling class. And you hit the nail of the head, Dave, was that the motive for culture with the ruling class is to dominate the working
mm,
class, is to make sure that we accept the ideology of profit, that we accept that as the norm. And so all of our art forms are designed to make us accept that. And so what Mao's saying is that there's actually a difference here, like the culture of the working class is not about that. The culture of socialism and the culture of communists is not about that. It's about
mm,
that culture of the working class taking control of our factories, taking control of the fact that we make the profit, we make everything in the society, we
mm.
create it, out of our labor, and yet
That's right.
they are gaining all the benefit from it, simply saying, oh well, there's we deserve it because we've invested X amount of dollars. There's
Mm,
and again, that's that whole historical stuff that we have to understand. So just like the war against Russia, and it is a war against Russia, this is not a war against Ukraine. um,
mm.
the war against Russia has historical um, information behind it, and we have to learn that. Just like
Yeah.
we have to learn that what is this historical um, culture that is being forced upon us, and it's the culture of them being able to say this is how it always is, this is how it always was, and this is how it's always going to be, because we want to keep making money out of you guys, out of
Mm.
your labor as the working
That's right.
class.
That's right. And
And
then
we
that's
have
what
to
the idea. You
understand
go.
that.
Yeah, and we do have to understand. We just didn't have to arrive at this situation overnight. Everything's got a history behind it. From every, but it don't nothing just all of a sudden and spontaneously happens. It obviously, with regard to what happened with the Soviet Union before the Second World War, after the Second World War, early 1990s, and then the Russian Federation being a hellscape till about 1999. Yeltsin was gone, oligarchs fled, and then Putin, the rise of Putin. And what did he do? Nationalised industries, arrested some of the oligarchs, started to turn things around because Russia was a very unstable society, man, for years. And under his leadership, they've rebuilt. Interesting. The economic basis is interesting enough. I've actually said this to a few people, but the economic base of Russia itself, its economy is a lot more left wing than, say, ours or the US. There's a lot of nationalised industries. Shell's now threatened to pull out of Russia. Great. Goodbye. Don't come back because we're going to nationalise you. And he's been threatening to do that. And then McDonald's and KFC and all of them are going too. Well, great. We don't need you anyway because it's unhealthy. It's interesting. There they were. And it's like, well, goodbye. Don't come back. You didn't culturally enhance us. Your food's crap. So it's not food, actually. It's whatever you put into it. It's not very healthy at all. So, it's not going to be greatly missed. Then they're talking about tobacco products. Well, who cares about tobacco? Who wants to smoke anyway? It just goes. And the thing is, too, this is where the extreme is where they just turn anything that's Russian bad. I mean, the banning of having cats in an international cat show or whatever. These are pet owners, Russian pet owners own cats. Some European contest or whatever they get involved in are being banned. Russian cats. I'm not kidding you. Just your normal domestic cats from Russia. Yeah, and it goes. And also, I believe I'm not too sure if it was Germany itself or Denmark or the Netherlands, but they were even starting to ban people of Russian heritage from going into hospitals. We're not treating any Russian at all. That's fucking disgraceful. This is what we're fucking up against. And really, by rights, and what we're seeing here, people, it's just demonising. And this is the whole culture art thing. It's about demonising a certain people. And this is exactly what the Nazis did in World War II. Hitler tried to do is demonise the Russian people, have them massively exterminated so they can settle the German throughout and maybe allow a few other little cultures there to exist still as that. And this is what it comes down to. So really, when fascism is, yes, we're seeing brute force within Ukraine, but actually it's creeping here too. And the idea was to demonise another people. So it's completely disgraceful what they do, banning Russian art. I mean, yes, the other one, the opera singer, I think, and even Russian music, like classical music. I'm going, what? It's going beyond the joke. In fact, I'm going to encourage everyone play Russian music. Play it at school. You get your hands on it. Play it loud. Play it proud. Spread it everywhere. We're sick and tired of this because we are being lied to. People who are in doubt or don't know really what's going on, and even those who have been tending the pro-Ukrainian, I stand with Ukraine type rallies, don't understand. You don't really know what it's getting into. And also, I'll be very aware. Just a warning: don't start donating money to various organisations. You do your research on them thoroughly, because you might be thinking you might be helping innocent people, on the goodness of your heart. But the fact is, your money could be going to some very shady people as well around the plate. And there's a lot of people that do that, take advantage of this situation. So just be warned about that. Do your research, making sure they're, proper organisations, not and just be, as I said, be careful follow the money, basically. But yeah, I mean, this is what the culture of an art, and this is what the ruling class does as well, is play on the goodness of people's hearts. People have got concerns. No one likes war. No one likes any of it. Yeah, and yeah, no one likes what's going on in that. And what they do is play on people's concerns and the goodness of their hearts. Oh my God, yeah, and oh no, this is all wrong. Russia is back. Well, we could get it in there, and off they go, and not realising they're actually being completely misled. Yeah, and all been played on as well, and it's done deliberately. Uh, Actually, Luke asked a question. Hey, Luke, how you going? I'll just throw you up there. Why are they banning classical music? I'm surprised how many sensible people sucked into this anti-Russian stuff. Yeah, exactly. It's because this is what culture does. It whips everyone up in a mass hysteria about things. You look at the media. That's why I don't bother with mainstream media now. And that includes the ABC and SBS. The ABC should be correctly now known as the Australian Bullshit Corporation. I'm not going to bother anything worth saving anymore. But even SBS as well. I mean, once a long time ago, you would have had a little bit more thought about these things from them. I'm not going to just follow any government or any propaganda, but this is what they're putting out. But they're putting it. You look at it. You look at the Murdoch press. It's so sensational. It's like it's in your face and everything else, and it's get people on edge all the time and rope them in and all this. And all basically he says what Murdoch correctly said once. I think it was Murdoch or one of his senior CEOs have actually said, we want to provide our news entertaining, and that's a way to sell, and that's what they do. It's not real news at all. It's just garbage, but it's entertaining for people. But they at the same time know how to play on people's good intentions and goodness of their hearts, and that's where people are vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely, and there's so many, but there are so without actually kind of staying on the subject for too long, because it's such a divisive It's such a divisive issue as well. But
Yeah.
the hypocrisy of this situation is beyond comprehension. It's
Yeah.
beyond understanding. How can we, on the one hand, and it's not that we actually supported what went on in Iraq, because there were millions of people around the world, the biggest demonstrations against the let's say the invasion of Iraq, sorry. There were millions upon millions of people that demonstrated against that invasion from the United
Mm.
States. But you don't see any of their culture being banned. You don't see any of their anything that they did being suggested to be genocide or to suggested to be outrageous or anything. And yet we demonstrated against it in our millions. But
Mm.
none of the press portrayed it in the way that it is being portrayed by the Russian, by what's occurring in the Ukraine situation. This
Yep.
is beyond, even if you looked at that situation, all you need to think is, why is this different from what the United States did? In fact, it's not even, it's on such another level that we can't even comprehend. The United States went into Iraq even though they knew there were no weapons of mass destruction. And that was
Yep.
the premise, that they went on to bomb the shit out of that country. Millions of people died, millions of people were displaced, and yet none of it was portrayed in the media like the way it is
Mm.
being portrayed now.
Yeah.
The left did it. The left in our countries didn't come out demonstrating week after week after week against this invasion of Iraq. But
Mm.
I bet you guaranteed that we're going to see demonstration after demonstration after demonstration, and all they're saying is no, Russia out, no to NATO.
Yeah.
It's absolutely beyond hypocritical, beyond the levels of hypocrisy that
Yep.
really an ordinary person should just be spewing. You should be vomiting at the stuff that they're coming out with.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
most of even the progressives are vomiting that stuff out. It's just verbal diarrhea about what's going on over there.
Yep.
To me, it's just beyond comprehension. I'm not even saying who's right or wrong. I'm really just talking about the shit that they're talking and the way that they're portraying this event as being beyond something that they would ever consider doing. And yet they've been doing it around the world. In fact, I saw, and I didn't see it, but it was told to me, a fantastic cartoon where Morrison, Boris Johnson, the Biden, and Zelensky, and all of these so-called the Western Democrats around the world, they're linked arm in arm, and they're saying, "Oh my God, it's disgusting! How could they be doing that? We've got to fight this. This is just ludicrous." And right in front of them is this mountain, and they're standing linked arms in front of this mountain, and this mountain is of skulls. And on all of these skulls is labeled the countries that they've invaded, such as Iraq, such as Iran, such as Vietnam, such as Korea, such as this, such as Yemen, such as, oh, Jesus, the list just goes on and on and on. It's
Mm.
beyond what we could conceive of as being normal, a normal situation. And yet people are swallowing up like it's such an acceptable situation. And I know I've ranted and raved about it, but it's just the culture of us accepting what the media says and what the dominant ideology and the dominant ideas say about a situation around the world. And
That's
and if we don't fight against that, even just pose or ask ourselves, what is actually behind this? What's the motive behind this war? What's the motive behind every single war that has occurred? Then we are forever going to only be siding with the dominant culture and the
yep.
dominant ideas. And
Yep. Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And like
and in terms
there's
of
some.
Australia, we will be pariahs. We will be excluded. We will be seen as
Oh,
just the sheer lapdog ass kisses of US imperialism and not an independent nation at all. And that will be our culture. And is that
Yeah.
something we want to be known as?
Exactly, and the act is, at the end of the day, it's Australia will be seen as a pariah state. I mean, a lot of countries will turn us back on it eventually, and we're looking at it would be very alone in the world. The great there with rallies and stuff. I remember, I think it was early 2000. I think it was about 2003. We had the mass demonstrations against Iraq. I was in Sydney at the time, over 500,000. I mean, the whole city stopped. It was amazing um, because it was, at the time, the momentum should have been kept up. I think there was a couple more big rallies, demonstrations, and then sort of, I don't know, it just basically split and horrible after that, and then they kept it up. But the momentum should have been like a strategy around it. And the fact is, at the end of the day, we could have stopped even further, but we've been lied to ever since about all sorts of things, and of course the people who make decision makers and that get away with it scot free. Leave that. Well, I'm going to round it up tonight. It's 8:30. We went for an hour and a half, so well done, everyone. And we will be back in a fortnight's time. We'll start a new study, a live study, and we'll discuss in the meantime what document or what book we'll be looking at. But thank you, everyone, for participating tonight. Big shout out to everyone, and I wish you all the best. And take care.
Keep watching.
Keep watching. Thank you.